Few countries in the modern era have been shaped by or subject to the horrors of war as much as Poland. From its emergence after the First World War in 1918 until 20 years later, it found itself again subject to occupation. The army has played a key role in Poland's history and development. In this series of films, we look at that time, the emergence of a new army in 1918, its first major conflict in the Polish-Soviet War, its attempts during the 1930s to maintain development faced with a European-wide arms race and the struggle of the Second World War. This is a story of how the Polish army and the Navy and the Air Force responded to that challenge. Once it became impossible for the army to fight in Poland, that wasn't the end of the story, because of course the Polish armed forces were fighting with the Allies in almost every other theatre. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about the activities of the Polish contribution to the other battles during the course of the Second World War.
Tak, po klęsce w 1939 roku wojsko polskie zostało odtworzone w Francji.
After the defeat in 1939, the Polish army was recreated in France. A new Polish government in exile was formed under General Sikorski, and this government formed an army that in 1940 reached numbers of around 80,000 soldiers. This army took part in the defense of France in 1940. Unfortunately, France was conquered by the Germans, so some Polish forces, tens of thousands of Polish soldiers, managed to evacuate to Great Britain. There, the Polish army was recreated again. The Polish army was built up in Scotland again, and it was there that the Polish First Corps was created, which included the 1st Polish Armoured Division, founded in 1942, commanded by the famous General Stanisław Maciek. Other units were also created, for example the 1st Polish Independent Parachute Brigade, whose commander was General Stanisław Sosabowski. Polish troops alongside the Allies were also created in the Middle East. In Syria, the Polish Independent Carpathian Rifle Brigade was created, which later moved on to Palestine and Egypt and was transferred to British command. These soldiers became famous for aiding the Allies to defend the African stronghold Tobruk during the siege of Tobruk. There, they fought under the command of General Stanisław Kopański. After the German attack on the Soviet Union in 1941, a Polish army under General Władysław Anders was created in the Soviet Union, an army to which those Poles who the Soviets had forcibly deported from eastern Poland deep into the Soviet Union as part of the repression of Poland. This army was later evacuated to British-controlled areas in the Middle East, to Iraq and Iran by the decision of Allies. Based on this army, the Polish Second Corps was created, which in 1944 was sent to fight in Italy. The Polish soldiers of the Second Corps, commanded by General Władysław Anders, conquered the monastery of Monte Cassino, which was defended by the Germans, and thus opened the way to Rome to the Allies. Later this corps ended its participation in the war by capturing and liberating the Italian city of Bologna. However, those Polish soldiers who had remained on the British Isles took part in Operation Overlord following D-Day. The 1st Polish Armoured Division of General Maciek became famous at the beginning of August 1944 at the Battle of Falaise, where it played a vital role in sealing the encirclement of German troops in the Falaise pocket, and in doing so became the most famous Polish armoured unit in history. They later continued battle route through France, Belgium and the Netherlands. We must not forget that Sosabowski's Polish paratroopers took part in the Battle of Arnhem, the largest airborne operation of the Second World War.
Nie możemy zapomnieć też, że polscy spadochroniarze generała Sosabowskiego wzięli udział w bitwie pod Arnhem, największej operacji powietrzno-desantowej II wojny światowej.
And if I could just ask, perhaps one of the most famous operations of the Second World War, indeed, which made from the British perspective the war possible in many ways, or the continuation of the war, was of course the Polish contribution to the RAF and the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940. I was wondering if you'd like to say a few words about the Polish pilots who took part.
Tak, polscy piloci, którym udało się wydostać z Polski, wzięli też udział w obronie Wielkiej Brytanii.
Polish pilots who managed to evacuate from Poland also took part in the defense of Great Britain. Two Polish squadrons, the 2nd Fighter Squadron and 303rd Fighter Squadron, took part in the Battle of Britain. The 303rd Squadron became the most famous Polish squadron after it downed 126 German aircrafts during the Battle of Britain. Among the pilots of this squadron was Witold Urbanowicz, whose uniform we can see in our museum. This pilot commanded the squadron and later also fought in the Far East alongside the US Army, which assisted the Chinese in fighting the Japanese. Polish pilots were not only fighter pilots, they served as bomb crews that participated in many bomb operations over Germany. Among others, they bombed German troops in Belgium and the Ruhr area. They also conducted other activities that were significant when it came to bomber aviation. The Poles were respected in the eyes of the British. Polish pilots were the only Poles who were invited to the Victory Parade in London after the war, but they turned the offer down as solidarity with the other Polish units which had not been invited.
Zwycięstwa, natomiast nie wystąpili w tej defiladzie ze względów politycznych.
One of the early operations in the Second World War was, of course, the attack on, or the expedition to Narvik, which was ultimately intended to try to disrupt the supply of Swedish iron ore to Germany, to disrupt their war effort. Again, another operation in which there was a British-Polish cooperation.
W 1940 roku wspólną operację Polacy podjęli.
In 1940, the Polish army, which had been established in France, undertook a joint operation with the Allies. The Polish Independent Highland Brigade was sent to defend Narvik against the German invasion. It was a Norwegian port for which the Allies fought together, the Poles, the French and the British. The Polish fleet also participated in this operation. Polish destroyers took part in the battles for Narvik, and one of them was sunk there by the Germans.
Jeden z nich został tam zatopiony przez Niemców. Był to RP Grom.
One of the obviously things that was done with the Special Operations Executive in England was, of course, to train Polish special forces to be parachuted into Poland to join with the underground and to try and obviously foment attacks against the Germans. I wonder if you were able to say a few words about those operations.
W czasie II wojny światowej Polacy też chcieli pomóc, polscy żołnierze na zachodzie chcieli pomóc tym.
During World War II, Polish soldiers in the West wanted to help those who were in the country, and therefore they were training soldiers who were to support the resistance in the country. They were so-called cichociemni, or the silent unseen. They were prepared to fight in Poland on special courses. They were prepared to be transferred by air transport to Poland. 316 of these silent unseen, who fought in the ranks of the Polish Home Army, were transferred to Poland. They were then trained to teach the other soldiers of the underground fighting methods. These soldiers were very thoroughly prepared for various activities. They were prepared for both direct combat and acts of sabotage. They were not only taught to fight, but also how to forge documents to be able to survive in an occupied country, how to organize all sorts of underground activities that would allow the Home Army, the underground army, to fight.
Walczyć armii krajowej, armii podziemnej.
One of the images we have when we see films about the Warsaw Uprising is these brave fighters with their Sten guns, which look very much like the British Sten gun. I was wondering how those guns appeared in the Warsaw Uprising and at other times.
Steny, które możemy obejrzeć na zdjęciach, to nie są tylko steny brytyjskie. Oczywiście część to była broń.
Sten guns that we can see in the pictures are not just British Sten guns. Of course, some of them were weapons that were sent to Poland by Allied airdrops. And Poland was the only occupied country which organized serial but underground production of weapons was started. Since the construction of the Sten gun is very simple, any locksmith's workshop can make components for this type of weapon, which is why Polish craftsmen Scotsmen undertook this and created Polish Sten guns that were copies of British Sten guns. According to ballistic experts, because they used barrels from the Vis pistol, these machine pistols were better than the British. The Polish underground also developed their own Błyskawica, or lightning, submachine gun that combined the appearance of the German MP submachine gun and Sten gun.
Niemieckiego pistoletu maszynowego MP i pistoletu Sten.
In these programs we've seen how Poland, from its emergence in 1918, after 123 years of partition, has, as a state, had to fight for its place in Europe. The army and the other services have constantly grappled with the need for new technology against an ever-changing European political and military background. This fight for technology is one thing, but in Poland there was also a fight, a real fight, against real enemies. And despite their material defects of never quite being ready, of never quite having enough equipment, the Polish military spirit was undimmed. This was clearest of all in the Second World War, when Poland contributed to two particular events, the Battle at Monte Cassino and the contribution to the Battle of Britain. Those just two out of every major theatre in which the Polish army took part. This has been a fascinating story of an undimmed military spirit fighting against all the odds. A great story. I'm Nicholas Richardson, and join me again on Poland Daily History when we delve into some more exciting aspects of Poland's history.